At 4:17 a.m., 3 Venezuelan patrol boats tried to block a 100,000-ton U.S. aircraft carrier in the dark waters of the Caribbean. No warning shots, no radio threats, just steel closing in on steel. What followed wasn't a firefight, it was a test of nerve. A U.S. destroyer moved to cut them off. A Navy helicopter watched every move from above. And before sunrise, one side blinked, without a single shot being fired. At 4:17 a.m., the Caribbean lay wrapped in darkness as the USS George Washington cut through the water at a steady 20 knots. The carrier's deck was quiet, its systems humming with the practiced precision only a U.S. carrier strike group can maintain before sunrise. Nothing unusual, just another routine patrol as Washington continued tightening its grip on the drug routes that had long fed the Venezuelan regime. The kind of calm that usually lasts longer than 5 minutes. Not today. 3 Venezuelan fast patrol ships burst from the dark, engines straining as they sliced directly across the carrier's bow. They swung into a tight V-shaped barricade, so dramatic it felt choreographed for television. Specifically, the television back in Venezuela. Their approach snapped into classic attack geometry, a formation small navies use when they want outsized reactions for small cameras. The carrier strike group did not react. It held course. When you displace 100,000 tons, you let others do the swerving. But as the patrol ships closed the distance, the real question emerged. Were they testing American steel or hoping someone somewhere was filming the attempt? Like and subscribe to Military Power so you don't miss what happens next. This attempted blockade did not occur in isolation. It unfolded inside a broader pressure campaign that had been tightening around Venezuela for months. Under Operation Southern Spear, the United States expanded its naval footprint across the southern Caribbean, deploying destroyers, Coast Guard cutters, surveillance aircraft, and carrier strike groups to crack down on drug routes long intertwined with the Maduro regime. Every patrol, every radar sweep, every interdiction compressed Caracas into a smaller and smaller corner. Some regimes respond quietly. This one chose theater. The pressure was not limited to the sea. Washington, under a renewed hardline posture, formally designated Venezuelan, linked cartels and their enablers as terrorist networks. They dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country from prisons. I'm not in love with the people running Venezuela. I love Venezuela. I love the people of Venezuela. But what they've done to this country, the policy shift unlocked more aggressive intelligence operations, expanded military coordination with regional partners, and a clear mandate: intercept, document, and dismantle smuggling routes before they ever approached U.S. shores. The Caribbean was no longer just water. It became the forward edge of border security. For Caracas, that shift was intolerable. Maduro needed political oxygen, and he needed a distraction that didn't involve firing a missile or risking a war he could not win. What he did have was a state media machine starving for images that could make a modest navy look defiant against a superpower. Enter the tactic of choice. Close in visual provocation. Costs little. It risks less. And if the opponent overreacts, it can be recycled into propaganda for years. That is why 3 Venezuelan patrol ships pushed into the path of a 100,000-ton American carrier. Not because they expected the carrier to flinch, but because they hoped someone in Washington would. A harsh maneuver, a forced deviation, anything that could be clipped, edited, and broadcast back home as a victory. It was a calculated gamble wrapped in nationalistic theater. And like all risky performances, it depended on the other side making a mistake. But the United States is not in the business of providing free campaign material to adversarial regimes. That reality created a genuine challenge for the American strike group. The U.S. Navy possessed overwhelming firepower, Aegis destroyers, layered air defenses, ASW helicopters, and a carrier capable of launching combat aircraft every 30 seconds. Against that backdrop, the Venezuelan patrol ships were little more than metal props in a political play. Yet even overwhelming power must be applied carefully. Too soft, and it sends the wrong signal to every cartel, militia, and proxy watching from the sidelines. Too firm, and Caracas would gladly frame it as American aggression. This is where the political instinct of Trump-era policy came into focus. The administration emphasized forward pressure, deterrence through presence, and the idea that America defends its borders not just at the Rio Grande, but in the Caribbean, long before the first kilo of cocaine gets anywhere near Florida. A carrier holding course under provocation is not merely a naval decision. It is a statement of national posture. Venezuela understood that, which is precisely why its patrol ships were ordered to get as close as possible without firing, close enough to create noise, but not enough to trigger consequences. But at sea, intent matters only until metal approaches metal. As the three hulls tightened their V-shaped barrier, political messaging collided with physics. The moment ceased to be about narratives or televised bravado. It became about collision geometry, maritime law, and the responsibility of the U.S. Navy to prevent an avoidable incident without yielding a single degree of course. That was when the tone changed. Because when diplomacy and restraint reach their limit, the next message is delivered not by press releases but by steel. And that message came from the guided missile destroyer USS Gravely, already accelerating forward to draw a hard line across the sea. The instant the Venezuelan formation tightened, the balance of the encounter shifted, and the responsibility to reshape it fell squarely on Gravely, a warship designed for moments exactly like this. Until then, the destroyer had held a quiet escort position along the starboard edge of the formation. But with the carrier's path deliberately obstructed, silence was no longer sufficient. Gravely increased speed, her bow slicing a clean line through the dark water as she angled into the narrow space between the George Washington and the encroaching Venezuelan wall. It was not a rush. It was a calculation. She moved with the controlled confidence of a ship that knows precisely what it represents. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer Aegis combat system, Spy-1 radar, vertical launch cells loaded with SM-2s and ESSMs, torpedoes, and a 5-inch gun capable of reaching targets miles away. But none of that mattered in this moment. The weapon was the hull. The weapon was position. The Navy calls it positioning, not provocation. A discipline built on precision. Hold speed. Hold course. Block the unsafe maneuver without lighting up fire control radar or escalating to weapons. Let presence reset the geometry. It is the difference between a professional Navy and one fishing for footage. Gravely's bow crossed the invisible threshold first, sliding into place with surgical precision. The message was unmistakable, written entirely in steel. This lane is not yours. The Venezuelan ships now faced the choice they had hoped to avoid. Alter course or risk collision with a 9,000-ton destroyer that had no intention of blinking. Suddenly, the moment felt less cinematic and far more real. Inside the George Washington's Combat Information Center, Aegis displays refreshed every fraction of a second. Closest point of approach recalculated as Gravely cut into the intercept line. The screen resembled less a console and more a chessboard in motion. Each vessel, each throttle surge, each course correction another move. Some smart, some reckless, some only brave if you ignored physics. From Caracas' perspective, the goal had been simple. Force even the slightest deviation from the carrier. A few centimeters of altered heading could be sold as leverage on state television. But the Americans did not waver. The carrier held course. The destroyer moved like a knight, leaping into blocking position. And suddenly, the Venezuelan commanders were playing the wrong game. There was quiet intensity on both bridges. Venezuelan crews clustered at the rails, cameras rolling, hoping for drama. On Gravely, sailors maintained the same posture they would during a routine transit, calm, deliberate, unhurried. No raised voices, no panic, just a crew executing a playbook refined against Iranian fast boats, Chinese interceptors, and Russian cutters. Venezuela was not the first to try this, and it will not be the last. But Gravely was not improvising. Her navigation team adjusted just enough to deny the formation any path forward without tipping into aggression. Even the bow wave made the point, firm, unavoidable, final. Within a minute, the blockade collapsed. The wall no longer blocked anything, and Caracas' carefully staged moment shrank against the silhouette of an Arleigh Burke asserting control. Yet the encounter was far from over, because while Gravely controlled the surface picture, the Navy's real advantage was already rising from behind them. The thump of rotor blades began to roll across the deck. The steel wall was in place. Now the sky was about to come alive. As Gravely reshaped the encounter at sea level, another form of power prepared to enter, one that relied neither on armor nor tonnage. The sound came first. A deep, rhythmic thump as an MH-60R Seahawk spun up and lifted cleanly into the pre-dawn air. Built for war, trained for restraint, it rose carrying tools far more decisive than gun barrels. Beneath the fuselage, surface search radar, FLIR, electronic support measures, and a live data link feeding directly into Gravely's Aegis system. The helicopter was not just airborne. It was connected. As it climbed and banked into a tight orbit over the confrontation, the geometry below told a different story. Tight formations, bow angles, wakes flaring as engines pushed toward redline. The Seahawk captured all of it. FLIR swept the Venezuelan decks, tracing heat from overstressed machinery. Radar logged course changes. Sensors confirmed what cameras could not. The patrol ships were not merely lingering. They were pressing. Every byte of data streamed straight into the CIC. Operators now saw what the naked eye never could. Bearing shifts, throttle surges, turret movement, even crew clustering on deck. In a standoff, information is not an advantage. It is a weapon. And at that moment, the United States possessed all of it. The pressure was unmistakable. Any move, accelerate, slow, turn, rotate a gun mount was observed, recorded, and logged. Any reckless action could instantly become legal justification for self-defense, documented by sensors far more precise than any propaganda camera rolling below. And Caracas knew it. For a regime hoping for a media spectacle, being watched by a helicopter that never blinked was not the preferred angle. On the water, USS Gravely transitioned smoothly into its next phase. No firing, no radar lock, just escalation by posture, the kind that needs no explanation. The destroyer's 5-inch gun rotated forward at an unhurried pace, a deliberate movement visible from miles away. At the same time, Gravely's electronic warfare suite came fully online, its sensors emitting the unmistakable signature of a ship shifting into a higher readiness tier. Nothing aggressive, nothing ambiguous, just a clear reminder that any further push would be a decision the Venezuelan crews could not undo. This is how the U.S. Navy fights when it chooses not to fight. It uses information instead of intimidation, position instead of provocation, and the unspoken understanding that if force becomes necessary, it will not be a fair or symmetrical exchange. The broader message was unmistakable. The United States did not need missiles or warning shots to dominate the encounter. By pairing the steel presence of Gravely with the persistent surveillance of the Seahawk, the Navy demonstrated something Maduro cannot replicate: the ability to control the battlespace without ever pulling a trigger. Above the waterline, the Seahawk maintained its steady orbit. Below it, 3 Venezuelan patrol ships pressed deeper into a narrowing corner, shadowed by sensors that captured every twitch of their engines, which raised the question defining the next phase of the standoff, now under 4 nautical miles. Who would blink first? The crews clutching cameras on Venezuelan decks, or the American sailors holding formation as if nothing at all had changed? The encounter entered its most dangerous phase once the range dropped below 4 nautical miles. At that distance, the ocean no longer feels vast. Engines sounded louder. Wakes stretched longer beneath the rising light of dawn. Even minor course changes began to feel intentional. The Venezuelan ships surged forward with renewed urgency. White spray flaring off their bows, deck crews clustering at the rails with binoculars and cameras, gunners lingering near their mounts. Everything about their posture suggested desperation for a single dramatic frame, one moment they could sell as defiance on state television. USS Gravely, by contrast, appeared almost serene. Its crew moved with the steady rhythm of procedure rather than performance. No rushing, no gestures, no drama. Professionalism became its own form of pressure. When one side strains to look bold, nothing undercuts the act more effectively than an opponent who refuses to acknowledge the show. Then came the quietest escalation of all. Radio silence. Neither side initiated bridge-to-bridge communication. The Venezuelan captains avoided it because speaking meant owning their maneuver. The Americans avoided it because they understood exactly what Caracas wanted: an audio exchange that could be clipped, framed, and repurposed into propaganda. Without words, tension sharpened. But narrative control stayed entirely with the U.S. Navy. What unfolded was not a dialogue, but a test of nerve: who would expose weakness first, and who would dictate the next move. Inside Gravely's Combat Information Center, the tactical picture remained pristine. Aegis tracked every subtle change: bow angles, throttle surges, wake patterns, measuring risk with clinical precision. The computers showed numbers. The sailors reading them understood what those numbers meant. They were watching a foreign navy gamble national pride inside collision distance. When legal and tactical thresholds were satisfied, Gravely transmitted a standard open-channel maritime warning. No raised tone, no ship named, just a clear procedural statement. The American formation was operating lawfully in international waters, and nearby vessels were required to maintain a safe distance. The transmission did not ease the tension. It sharpened it. Like a thin line drawn across the sea, the message clarified, without threat or theatrics, that the United States was exactly where it was allowed to be, moving exactly as international law permits. In that quiet moment, responsibility for whatever followed shifted unmistakably onto the Venezuelan captains advancing from the dark. Venezuela avoided the one thing they could not control: recorded voice. Instead, their ships raised signal flags, a theatrical flourish designed more for domestic audiences than for operational use. It was the maritime equivalent of shouting into a camera while pretending not to see the microphone being offered. For anyone who eventually watches this footage, one fact matters above all others. The U.S. Carrier Strike Group remained in international waters throughout the encounter. That gave the United States every legal right to hold course, speed, and formation. By refusing to yield, the carrier was not provoking. It was preserving the rules that keep global navigation stable. When a superpower gives up space without cause, the consequences ripple far beyond a single morning at sea. This time, it did not. Then the sensors picked it up almost imperceptibly at first. The lead Venezuelan vessel eased back its throttle. Its bearing shifted by just a few degrees. The ships behind it mirrored the change. The once rigid V-shaped blockade sagged, then opened. A confrontation that had hovered near miscalculation dissolved back into the ambient rhythm of the sea. No announcements, no declarations of victory, just a slow, reluctant retreat. On the radar display, those tiny course deviations spoke louder than any speech ever could. In the Caribbean, victory is sometimes measured in degrees. The withdrawal unfolded as quietly as the approach. One ship peeled away, then another, then the last. Throttles eased, wakes thinned, distance grew. No flags of surrender, no radio acknowledgements. Just three silhouettes disengaging from a confrontation they could no longer control. For USS George Washington and her escorts, there was no celebration. Only confirmation. Confirmation that discipline outlasts provocation. That presence defeats spectacle. That a carrier strike group can defuse a crisis without touching its arsenal. No warning shots. No forced maneuvers. No concessions. The United States held course from start to finish. Venezuela stepped aside. In context, the encounter was not isolated. It was one moment in a larger campaign unfolding across the Caribbean. Since the expansion of Operation Southern Spear, these waters have become the forward edge of a pressure strategy aimed at choking cartel finances, and, by extension, the Maduro regime itself. Carrier strike groups, Coast Guard cutters, P-8 patrol aircraft, and Navy destroyers are not merely intercepting drug shipments. They are dismantling the shadow economy that sustains hostile actors. This is the doctrine of distance. Push outward, and trouble never reaches home.